so now I'm finna be mean and be evil.
Connor first physically attacked me 5 days before our wedding. It was 7 a.m.
This nigga came in the room as I'm crying. He took a pillow and put it over my face.
He just really gained so much control over my mental, bro. I cannot make this shit up.
When I saw it, I was in shock. I was like, fuck, why the hell did I hit her? Like, so from there, she's just spit in my face, like spit the blood in my face, and I'm like,
it's gonna be a heavy one today, guys. It's gonna be a heavy one. And because it's gonna be a heavy one, we're gonna start with a trigger warning. Today's episode, we're gonna be talking about domestic abuse, domestic violence, physical violence, mental violence, emotional, spiritual, and we'll cover sexual violence as well. So without further ado, guys, let's start this episode.
Violence happened before Chris Brown. It happens after Chris Brown. Any of us could be Rihanna. So 1-800-799-7233. If you are in danger, tell.
But before we start this episode, I've got to say this first. Can you please like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the thumbs up, hit the notification bell, so for when I do release an episode, it comes up in your algorithm. Also, if you want to engage in the conversation, if you feel like there's things I've missed out, said, done well, liked, hated, put it in the comment section. Engage in debate in the comment section. Doesn't matter if it's positive or negative. At this point, I just care if you're commenting because it pushes me up the algorithm. More insights, more engagement, high up the algorithm. I feel like pump. Sorry, this is a serious episode. But today we're going to be talking about domestic violence and can abusers change, and what triggered that. It was the series of stories or posts from Chris Brown about not being allowed into the NBA All-Star game, even though I'm pretty sure bro had played in the NBA games before, well, the All-Star NBA games before. I'm pretty sure he played in a celebrity charity match as well for the NBA, but hey, he wasn't allowed. And it made me think of the question, can abusers change? Do abusers change? And in order to highlight this debate and do it its fairness, we've got to start with the jugular, and that is, why do abusers abuse? And I thought I'd start with this clip.
The number one and only thing that causes a person's abuse is their decision to act abusive. Abuse is caused solely by that person's decision, actions, and moral compass that is askew.
See, the reason I start with that clip is because Dr. Ant illustrated it best. Abusers abuse because they choose to abuse. Argue with me, that's fine, but you are defined by your choices.
It is not our abilities that show what we truly are. It is our choices.
And as Dumbledore said, your choices is what defines you. Your choices is what makes you who you are. If abusers don't choose to abuse, why is it always done in secret? Why do they always hide it? The reason why you have to acknowledge that abusers choose to abuse, and it's a choice, is because they thrive in the land of inaccountability, if that's a word, blame deflection, excuse making, and that's where the victims themselves start to give them excuses as to coddle and enable that bad behavior. And that's not what we're doing on my fucking channel. No way, no how. So we start with abusers abuse because they choose to abuse, and the evidence is in the fact that it's hidden, done coercively, and when they are caught, they beg. And as if they're someone about to be put into trial, they beg and they kick and they scream for you to not reveal it or leave them. And it's because they know what they did is wrong. They know that. But what leads them, like Dr. Annie said, to have that skewed moral compass? What leads them to go down this road of abuse and thinking that that is a tangible thing to do? Let's look into it. See, there's several factors. The one that everyone likes to talk about is, oh, they were a victim themselves. That's for some, but not always. Some of the biggest correlating factors as to why people abuse is power, low self-esteem, emotional neglect, martyr complex. These are some, not all. There's loads of factors that lead someone to roll down the road of abuse. However, power being a big one, looking at someone as an object, looking at someone as their property, that's a big factor. Low self-esteem, having a an internal world that is in such disarray that controlling people is the only way that they can to mask and push away from the internal conflict that they feel inside. Martyr complex avoidance is always putting yourself in the hero position. Oh, I did this because, or this happened to me and it made me because. People with hero complexes can also develop these things. And a big one, emotional neglect.
Now, as a result of emotional neglect, not receiving the validation that they needed as children, witnessing unhealthy relationships, possibly being victims of abuse themselves, leads abusers to have extreme low self-esteem. In order for someone who doesn't feel very strong to feel powerful, they need someone or something to control. The abusive and controlling behavior is an overcompensation. It's an overcompensation for the lack of self-worth that they have internally. So to feel good about themselves, or just to feel secure, they need a victim to depend on. They need a victim to control.
See, the reason I like that video is it explains the emotional neglect and low self-esteem, which is so common in abusers. And I say this, and it's very important for me to say this, is that when you're with someone and you have a partner, you tend to mirror each other. You tend to mirror each other, whether that be your experiences or internal world. And victims themselves, I don't like the word victim again, but I have to use it for the purposes of this conversation. I think it's actually quite dehumanizing. I prefer future survivors. But victims themselves are people who have low self-esteem, and it gets trodden on even more due to the abusers. And you kind of mirror each other, and in fact they project their lower self-esteem onto you more and more and more. Low self-esteem, emotional neglect, and power are some of the most vital components into seeing if someone is likely to abuse, and their relationships with this and how they deal with it is a likely reason as to why someone abused. Sorry, man. And like I said about the victim having low self-esteem and the perpetrator, the abuser, having low self-esteem too, this is where the hook comes into it. This is where the victim themselves gets hooked onto the abuser, because typically it's people who are compassionate, thoughtful, caring, empathic, or commonly used by us lot, empaths. They get hooked onto them. And what happens is that empaths have to be aware that, you know, I'm an empath too. Empaths are more likely to be abused. Empaths are more likely to be taken advantage of because of their better nature. But these people get hooked onto them because they can see through the vulnerabilities, they can see through the aggression. And like I said, you mirror each other, they can see that low self-esteem and develop an even higher and heightened sense of empathy towards them, because they can see that this is coming from an insecure and painful place. But the problem is, like I said earlier in the video, this is where the abusers thrive, because you're now enabling their bad behavior. And it seems a bit alien. It seems like I'm almost creating excuses, but a lot of victims talk about this. A lot of victims say this. And I saw this in a TED Talk where she said,
I never once thought of myself as a battered wife. Instead, I was a very strong woman in love with a deeply troubled man. And I was the only person on earth who could help Connor face his demons. The other question everybody asks is, why doesn't she just leave? Why didn't I walk out? I could have left any time. To me, this is the saddest and most painful question that people ask, because we victims know something you usually don't. It's incredibly dangerous to leave an abuser.
You see, this is so common for survivors. This is so common for people who had been through abuse and have come to the other end. They always speak about, I thought I could love them out of this. I thought I was the one that could change them, because it's coming from a loving place. It's coming from a caring place. Although there is high levels of fear, the reason they stay is because they believe that they can love them out of this darkness, love them out of this abuse. And if the abuser can just see how good they are and how much they're loving them, they will stop the abuse. Unfortunately, quite frankly, that rarely ever happens. And as that woman goes on to say, I believe it's Leslie says that her life was under threat. She was several times faced with a loaded gun in her head. And it wasn't until she reached a breaking point, and that's what a lot of the victims, future survivors, I prefer. tend to discuss as well, that they reach a breaking point, they reach a point in which they just like, yeah, this is it, I've got to move. But and you see the thing about this, yeah, about the excuse making, the enabling, it creates a sort of traumatic bond, that seeing their inner child bleeding out for help, even though their inner adult is bleeding onto you. It creates that traumatic bond. It creates that link. It creates that tie where you, like Leslie said, you think you're the one that can save them. You think you're the one that can love them out of this. And it's because you see them in their most vulnerable states. There was an article called Mothers as Victims as Intimate Partner Violence. And in this article, it discusses the polarities of when people try to leave, when mothers try to leave, when victims try to leave their abused partners. And they spoke about those polarities where often the abuser will enter into like a temporary state of remorsefulness and pity and shame of what they've done, and it hooks these victims into them. And also there's practical reasons as to why people stay. In this article where she states that mothers especially don't want to break up their family unit, don't want to break up the dilemma, and question whether they have the emotional capacity, the financial capacity to maintain this family without the abusive partner. And it keeps them in a state of trappedness, and it keeps them in a state of dependency in this partner. And that's where, again, like I said, the partner thrives and you end up with this traumatic bond, them needing you and you needing that validation that you can eventually change them. And by you, I mean the victim. But like I said with the mother's article, abuse, domestic abuse, physical abuse never really comes in one, never just really comes just physical. It tends to be physical and mental, mental, financial, physical, mental, sexual, physical, sexual. It tends to come in groups. Domestic violence never just comes in just one form, rarely anyway. So what does that look like?
I met a man who got money, who taking care of a bitch, spoiling me, shopping, be kicking it, right? Wrong. It was a trap. It was to wheel me in to get me, right? And so, months into the relationship, I noticed the verbal abuse began, right? And so, what he did was he started to pull me away from my friends. You know what I mean? Pull me away from my friends. And didn't want me to hang out with them or none of that no more. And I stopped hanging out with him, And he started gaining control of my mental. And once he gained control of my mental, he began to put me down. Making me feel like I was worthless. I wasn't shit. I was ugly. He used to call me ugly. And I started to believe that shit. I can't believe that. I can't believe I'm even talking about this. This is really tough for me to talk about because I never talk about it. Because I don't want to feel like a victim of it. But at one point, I was a victim of abusive relationship. And so I began to have a fearness within this man. Like, I kind of was scared of him in a sense, right?
See, the reason I like what Denise said is that highlights to me the mental aspect of abuse, the put downs, the name calling. And it's not just limited to that. There's gaslighting that everyone's familiar with, altering reality, undermining your intelligence, characters assassinations as well. And Denise also talks about the financial abuse that she went through.
Because I started letting this man put his fucking hands on me. And the abuse just kept going and it kept going and it kept going, right? And he cheating on me, staying out late, just whatever. And we be always arguing and fighting and arguing and fighting. And I started to feel like there was no fucking way out. I kept trying to look for a job and look for a job. I couldn't find a fucking job. I needed the security. And that was why I stayed with him the time length that I did stay with him. I needed that little bit of security at that moment. Okay, so I had to endure that. But I really didn't have to endure that. I could have left. You know what I mean? But I actually felt like I loved him and that I can change this man. I can make him look at me differently, and start treating me the way he was treating me in the beginning. But no, I couldn't because he was showing me who he was.
See, the reason I like Denise's story is that she's come out the other side, but you can see the hurt and the pain as she still discusses this as well. You can see the trauma resurfacing as she still discusses it. And she's someone, to me, that it left me a little bit emotional as well, because Denise is someone that I viewed as strong when I first saw her, but you could see how much she had to overcome, how much resilience that she had to develop when she went through that. And like I said, abuse typically comes in multiple forms, whether that be physical, mental, financial. She was in a situation where she was financially dependent. The mothers are financially dependent, emotionally dependent on the support of the fathers as well. And that can be not just financial as well. There's other dependencies that are created. Like Leslie said in the TED Talk, there's that emotional dependency where you feel the need to save them, you're hooked to them, that traumatic bond, like I said. But emotional abuse is one that goes under the radar a lot. Emotional abuse is one that people don't discuss enough, and a lot of people say it's akin to physical abuse. The mental scars are what last much, much longer than the physical ones. Yes, physical abuse has that added danger of life or death. You can eventually die, and people do die from this. I've had loved ones die from this, if I'm being honest with you. And so it is real. But mental is very, very, very powerful. And here's a clip of what mental abuse can look like.
I'm in Orlando, I'm smoking, and we're on the phone. And started talking about how, I think I was telling him, oh, I'm finna go hang out with my girls, I'm finna go hang out with my friends, this, that, and the third. And he said something along the lines of, well, did you ask me if you could go? And I was like, what do you mean ask you cannot go? He was like, you didn't ask me if it was okay for you to like go out with your friends. Like, does my opinion not matter? And I was like, I mean, it does matter, but like, why would I need to ask you? I'll tell you that I'm going out, you know what I'm saying? But like, why would I have to call you and ask you, hey babe, can I go out with my friends? No, like, I ain't never been in no situation like that, and it was not finna start happening. Like, This is what blew me, y'all. Basically, the argument was, I'm your dude, so if something happens to you, it's gonna fall back on me. Who you gonna call if something happen? You're not gonna call your parents because they don't fuck with you. You're not gonna call your family because they don't fuck with you. Who you gonna call? You're gonna have to call me. So I need to know, you need to ask me if you could go or not.
See, why I brought this in is this is controlling. This is what controlling behavior looks like, and what controlling behavior looks like as opposed to assertive and saying how you feel. Now, you see, take that example where he's telling her he doesn't want her to go out. Say as a man, you want to discuss this with someone that you're not comfortable with them going out. You should say that. You see, what makes this controlling and mental abuse is the aspect of he owns her. You can't go out. I'm not allowing you to go out. Then the put downs. Now, if you want to have that in a healthy conversation, you say, I'm not comfortable with it. I wish you had told me that. I'm not telling you where you can't and can't go, but I would have preferred to be brought into the conversation, been let know in your decision to go out. You not telling me leaves me a little bit uncomfortable. That's a healthy way of having the conversation. The way he's gone about it is full on emotional abuse. But the thing about emotional abuse is that it's not just limited to that. It's not just it's like a whistle-stop tour, innit? On to the next abuse. It's not just limited to that. Like I said, gaslighting, avoidance, minimizing, blowing hot and cold, invasion of personal space as well. You see, there's so many different forms, and some people may hear that and think some of that's not that serious to them. And I hear that. But sometimes you've got to understand that what you do, whether that be a coping mechanism, for me, blowing hot and cold, minimizing is an avoidance tactic, a gaslighting tactic, invasion of personal space. People may not understand, may have had poor personal boundaries, and that's why they do it. But when you hear these things and you've realized that you've made people uncomfortable by them, I'm speaking to men here, but if you've made, or women as well actually, if you realize that this is something you've done, you've engaged in manipulation where you've altered someone's mind state and emotion deliberately to gain an upper hand from them, the most important thing is to take accountability and apologize and own the fact that you did that. See, that's the big aspect of how you can heal if you're an abuser, is to take accountability for what you did. And a lot of people, when it comes to emotional abuse, in my opinion, don't take accountability for what they did because it's intangible. It's not tangible. Where physical, it's far more tangible as to what you did. However, as I was saying, emotional abuse in many cases is akin to physical. In many cases, not all, let me not lie. And if some of that resonated to you, whether you've been a victim of it or you have perpetrated it, own it, accept it, and try to learn and move on from it. If you're someone who has perpetrated it, myself included, own it, accept it. And if you've been a victim of it, myself included, own it, learn from it, maybe seek some help. See, the most powerful thing about domestic violence and the thing that makes it so damaging is the voice that becomes silenced, is the inner voice that you lose connection with. You see that gut feeling you have as a child where you trust your intuition. And as an adult, we start to trust our intuition less and less. Domestic violence destroys any trust that you have in yourself. It gives you states of anxiety, anxious, panic attacks, high levels of depression, suicidal litigation, and it thrives and domestic violence thrives in anxious attachment styles, hyper independence. They thrive in that. And it's important to seek the help. That's why I discussed seeking the help in my previous statement. But we are here to understand, can abusers change? The short answer is not on your fucking watch if you've been abused.
Not on my watch. Not on my watch.
Not on your fucking watch if you've been abused. You see, abusers cannot change in the same environment in which they thrive. A skirted accountability was enabled through their bad behaviors. They have to be removed from that. And a lot of studies indicate that that is the best method. Now, it's not, obviously, because it's quantitative data, it's never 100%, but it's so extremely rare. It's so extremely rare that abusers change in the environment in which they were enabled to abuse in the first place. But the longer answer is, once they're removed from that, can they change? And that's perhaps, yeah. There's this clip I saw from Vice, which I think is really powerful.
The first step usually was the verbal coercion, the threat. Very quickly after, it would like be a backhand or a slap. We call it chin checking, right? Just whap, whap. And it escalates from there.
Jimmy Espinosa spent much of his life abusing women before going through RSVP. He's now a facilitator for the program.
Once I can objectify a woman and then put a hand to her and gain that, like, see, I told you, then the ass whoopings would escalate, right, to full out beatings. I never questioned that I wasn't right.
You see, the reason I like this clip is it highlights a lot of things that I've seen that had helped people move on from their abuse, and was like a restorative justice process, a restorative justice healing process for those abusers. And people may feel like, why do the abusers need to heal? I feel like, in my opinion, if you heal the abusers, you're actually protecting the victims as well. So it's actually victim focused, the restorative process, that process of them learning they're wrong, as opposed to the punitive one, which is just throw them out of society until X amount of time. Look at our reoffending rates, doesn't really help. And as you can see with emotional abuse, it skirts under the radar, bubbles under the surface, and it doesn't get dealt with the same way because it doesn't have those tangible, real world feelings that physical violence happens. So a lot of people that illustrate and have enacted physical violence typically can skirt under the radar with emotional abuse because it gets discussed a lot less. But with this restorative justice approach, as you can see, they were very self-reflective, which is something it's something that you need to illustrate that you can go forward from your abusive past. Clear signs that they're not abusing anymore. They were locked up. So we've got to see how they go on. That guy in that clip especially, I doubt he'd been abusing before. They wouldn't have brought him here. Accountability, he definitely took accountability. Although his body language didn't give me this, but he did seem very empathetic. And the difference between empathy and feeling pity and sorry for yourself is that he discussed what he had done to others. He took responsibility and was aware of the actions of which he had done to others. And taking responsibility is the key point. Like I said about the emotional abuse, if you're someone who's been a victim or a perpetrator of it, is to take the responsibility, own it, sit in it, name the fact that you were an abuser, name the fact that you took advantage of someone. If you can't do that, there is nowhere to go. You're not going anywhere. And the clip that started this, Chris Brown, in his interview, owned the fact that he did abuse Rihanna. He did take advantage of her and he did abuse her.
But from there, I said, you know what, I'm gonna just take everything and like it's come. My consequences for my actions have to be dealt with. You know, I turned myself in the next day, pled guilty, didn't, you know, argue, didn't say, hey, now let me fight this case and take it to trial, and just say, hey, she fought me back. No, I'm not. That's not where my head was at, and that's not where it is now. You know, I loved her. You know, I wanted to protect her because I did too much stuff to her. Like, I did what I did, so it was wrong.
So guys, it was a whistle-stop tour of abuse, wasn't it? I'm not trying to minimize it at all. It was very fast-paced. It was something that I tried to cover as many different aspects, as well as trying to be fair to the people that had been abused, bringing their stories in. If you have any debates, any challenges you want to come at me with, put it into the comment section. I'm here for it. I'm here to do another one. If you want to see that, if you want me to tackle childhood abuse, childhood parental abuse, make the difference between parental and spousal abuse, because a lot of people, especially in urban communities, the Black community, my own community as well, parental abuse doesn't get discussed about. Another thing I'll say is that this is as much a women's issue as it is a men's issue. First of all, men's abuse will always be underreported because of stigma, society, whether that be emotional, physical, or abuse that happened to them as a child. On top of that, most of the perpetrators of abuse are men. 85% of the official statistics that we have of abuse is women. The majority of the abusers are men. So that lets you know that this is as much a male issue as it is a women's issue. So if men out there watching this, this video was as much for you as it was for the women as well. And this leads me to my final point. If you are triggered by this, seek the help. I always say in my videos, do the work. And people say to me, what does do the work mean? Do the work can range from getting counseling, speaking to a therapist. I know sometimes I criticize therapy, counseling, and how it's modeled in our UK society and the US society if you're someone in America seeing this. But specifically when it comes to domestic violence, whether that be what we've been mainly focusing on, which is spousal abuse, but childhood abuse, parental abuse, is speaking to a professional can allow someone to intersect and dissect and understand what exactly has happened to you, and labeling it as abuse, and labeling it as not normal, and labeling it as what it is, and allows you to kind of break free of that pain and understand that pain in its truest and most honest format. I think avoiding that aspect of the growth, the work that I say, can remove you from true healing. The work can be going to the gym, fixing your diet, finding a new job. These are all methods of self-help. Meditating, journaling, yoga. There's alternative forms of therapy like musical therapy, something I saw which was a beautiful way to bring out emotions that have been left dormant. There's other forms like plant medicine, which people have used, which again, I do recommend having someone there who is a guide, a trained guide that can help you navigate and understand these things that you're seeing under these elusive states, I should say. But those are things that you can do to do the work, to see the work if you were triggered by this, whether that's you've been emotionally abused, physically abused, financially abused, if you've been triggered by it. These are things that I recommend for you. Also, like the emotional abuse one, even the physical one, if you're someone who's done it yourself, you definitely need to seek the help. Definitely to learn to take that accountability and sit in the pain that you cause in order to actually grow and not perpetrate again. But finally, I want to speak to the victims of abuse, because I've had, like I said, loved ones pass away to this. Oh, I expect to feel a bit emotional there, did I? Seek the help. Speak to someone. And when you get on the other side of it, remember you're not a victim no more, you're a survivor. it can be hard because of the shame and the feel and the social stigmas about domestic abuse. Typically when people say, oh, what makes someone abuse someone, it's like you're trying to remove the accountability from them as well. And that's never what I was trying to do ever in this life. But for people who have gone through it, because I have lost some people that I've loved dearly, seek the help. Leave that situation. You are worth way, way, way more than that. To attach your validation and your love and your worth to someone, learning that their abuse for you, that them abusing you is wrong, and you loving them enough will make them see that, you're worth more than that. You're worth more than that. Please go and seek help. If you see someone, you know someone, you have a friend who's in a situation like that, be supportive. Be supportive. Remove your judgmental fucking ears, because it's quite brave for them to come up to you and discuss what they're going through. Be supportive, be helpful, and remove your judgmental ears. I had to say that again. Guys, this week was a tough episode. This week was hard. It was like going through therapy myself. I was highly triggered at points. Put it into the comment section. I love talking to you guys. Like, comment, share, and subscribe. I'll see you next week. I hope I did a good job.
Love will not heal me, will not wipe my slate of a body clean. I will always be a woman of wounds, of rope-marked neck and melted skin. Love will not heal me, but it will hold my hand if I ever heal myself, and maybe teach me a joke that I can stay alive long enough to laugh at. I love you enough to want to love myself too.